Is the EU heading towards becoming more like a nation-state model rather than what it is currently? We had the State of the Union by Jean-Claude Juncker, the European Commission President, this morning, giving an insight into what he sees as the future of the European Union, the future of the European project. Stuff like the euro destined to be single across all European states and actually a single European president as opposed to what there currently is. Stephen, perhaps if we start with you, do you think that the EU is heading towards and actually will likely become a nation state in its model? And what was the most significant element which indicates that for you in terms of what we heard today?
I think there's no doubt that it wants to be a nation state. There are those who are driving this force for quite some time. The question was, how quickly could they achieve it? Because fundamentally, to have a nation state, you've already got some of in place, its own flag, its own parliament, its own courts, its own civil service. The next thing is, what about single taxation, central banking control, an army? And the things that I picked out today that were essential for the closing of this deal is to have a single finance minister with the powers to go into nation states and tell them what to do in times of trouble. So you imagine that during the 2008 crisis, that guy or girl would have been in Ireland, they would have been in Italy, they would have been in Greece, they'd have been in Cyprus, they'd have been in Spain, telling them how to control their money and their resources. And the second thing is very clear now, the European army. It's out in the open without a doubt.
Interesting you mentioned the finance minister role, and from the reading which I heard, it was the idea that they're going to assist with structural reform and assist if there's a risk of recession for that country. You see that, perhaps are you seeing that more as they would have far more assertive role? Is that what you see as...
This is wonderful, beautiful diplomatic language. We wish to assist you in helping your economy grow. Isn't that really a different way of saying, actually, we're going to get in there and tell you, look at the way that Greece was told what to do through an austerity program that put millions of people unemployed, 50% of the youth unemployed there. It was the Troika, of which the Commission was part, telling the Greek government that it's got to renege on pensions for people, telling them they've got to fire lecturers, telling them to do this. That's their level of assistance. It's a gentle word, but it has a real strong arm behind it.
Indrik, do you see that as the right interpretation of what Mr Juncker's words? They're assisting in terms of finance minister, in terms of also a president of the EU, somewhat far more assertive EU in terms of relationship with nation states and member states?
Well, from my perspective, things look a little bit differently. First of all, I don't think EU can ever become a nation state because as an Estonian, I will never become a Hungarian and vice versa. So it's kind of impossible task to become a nation state. But as a structure, pretty much we may call it federalist or whatever, whatever Verhofstadt uses these nice words always. But from my theoretical point of view, if EU wants to be efficient and successful government, it needs to look at its institutions, how they operate. Is co-decision and co-legislation efficient, or should we rather have more powers in one president and somebody supremo for finances, for Eurozone? I think theoretically it's right. Politically it's probably not the winning case right now because no political party in any member state can go out and hope to win the elections on that kind of ticket because the strong backlash, we want our country back, will be there immediately. Thirdly, what concerns the European Defence Force. So I don't brush it off the table because we have NATO indeed, but from American and Canadian viewpoint, it could be preferable to have one EU general talking to them instead of all Estonian huge commanders and Albanian and so on and so on. So we could be a second pillar in the NATO, nearby to the North African one, or North American one. However, it's also politically very, very difficult to do, and that's why we are choosing, behind the slogan to have common European defense, we are choosing something which we are used to. We create an institution which will fill in papers, and that's not the defense force. In my understanding, defense force is pooling the troops together. The language would probably be English, but I wouldn't resist for a German chief of staff.
Okay, Matt, I mean, would you be happy with this idea? Firstly, do you buy the idea that the trajectory of the EU is far more assertive in terms of how it reacts and its relationship with member states? I mean, would you be happy theoretically with the idea of a European finance minister coming into Ireland and dictating economic policy, financial structural reform?
No, and I have to say I was really disappointed with Jean-Claude Juncker's address today. Not that I was expecting a whole pile different, but it just appears to me that there are those within the centre of the European institutions who, rather than see Brexit, the election of Trump and other developments that have happened internationally as a wake-up call, have instead tried to exploit the outworkings of those events towards an age-old agenda. And it seemed to me today that what Jean-Claude Juncker was proposing was that basically the European institutions do what they always intended to do, but they do it faster and with even less democratic oversight than was originally envisaged. I'm speaking as somebody who supports the concept of the European Union. I believe that there are some issues that are so big that we can only deal with them as member states working together collaboratively. That's very different than establishing an EU army by centralising decision-making powers, by controlling the financial directions that national governments can take. And to me, that's fundamentally undemocratic. And to me, it's fundamentally in contrast with what European citizens right across all member states want to see the direction to be.
And this is, of course, Mr. Juncker's speech. So this was his ideas of where the trajectory of the EU should be. But if it is a reality, then from what you said, you would see significant problems with Ireland's relationship with the EU if that was where it was heading.
Again, and I see this right across the board, and my fear is, and I think Hendrik has touched on this, that undoubtedly there are those within national governments right across the EU who support the concept of what Jean-Claude Juncker was saying, but they would never have the nerve to go before their electorates with that platform. And they see the European institutions as a mechanism by which they can actually get and achieve their own ideological position without actually being accountable to their own electors for that. And that's very dangerous. And to me, what I see is Jean-Claude Juncker's vision, which is a vision that will in time actually be detrimental to the European Union project, which I support, or the alternative is those of us who want to see the European Union succeed come together and outline an alternative, which is that whereby national governments come to Europe as equals and work on those big issues that can only be delivered upon if we work together.
Okay. Just a quick remark to show you how it works. Because the European Defence Force, without any vote in Ireland, Finland, Austria, etc., would bring you into NATO through the back door.
Well, yeah, and that has always been
Finally,
our fear. And if you recall, whenever the Irish people rejected Nice and Lisbon treaties in the past, there have always been these assurances given when the treaties have been run again that in no way is there any agenda taking place at an EU level to create an EU army. It's quite clear that they were lies.
Sure. Yeah, a crucial element to this is what Matt has pointed out, is that they want to achieve this, they want to achieve it through the back door. But here, Juncker said today that this can all be achieved without treaty change. Think about the fact the finance minister, single taxation and army, all of it without change at the treaties, therefore cutting out two things. The elected politicians in those countries who might have a mandate from their people, and the people who might say, hang on a minute, we want the view or the vision that Matt has, or the view or vision that Hendrik has.
He justified it, though, not only in efficiency terms, but also in democratic terms, didn't he? He's sort of talking about we need to set out a process to democratise Europe, and the direction of Europe cannot be dictated from above. That's his exact quote.
He's doing exactly the opposite. If you're cutting out the people, you're cutting out their elected officials and making the decisions an essential core, that isn't democratic, that's oligarchical in many ways.
And it depends.
And the second thing I would look is the way that he wants to have pan-European parties, cutting out the nation-states parties with extra funding. That's another stage in this de-democratisation of the European Union.
Okay, final thoughts, Ingrid?
I also took a note of that he said that we can do it without any treaty change, which I find strange. I don't think we can do it without changing treaties. But in my understanding, it would be preferable when, for instance, in 2019 European elections, we had these different proposals in front of citizens, and they would vote and allow the members of European Parliament to deal with treaty changes. because then we have a mandate who will support one approach, the other party perhaps the other, and then we can prepare a new treaty, because otherwise, when the governments deal with the treaties, it's the recipes each gets something.
Well,
and
the
treaty
fairest way
doesn't
to deal with
look-
treaty change, if we're so confident in our position, is to ensure that treaties cannot take place unless they've been adopted by referendum by every member state.
Okay.
Let's put it to the people. And if this is about democratisation, then Jean-Claude Juncker or any other leader within the European institutions should surely have no objection to that.